Anti-war political websites at Feedspot. Chapter 1. Anti-war peace websites. Peace podcasts at podcasts.feedspot.com/peace_podcasts. alitila-paceofmind.co.uk/podcast. blogtalkradio.com/innerpeacelighthouse. buzzsprout.com/1744847. crisisgroup.org/Europe-Asia/war-peace-season-4. feeds.buzzsprout.com/1654174. findingjoyandpeace.com/podcasts. croc.nd.edu/news-events/podcasts/the-croc-cast. croc.nd.edu/research/intersectionality/pedagogies-for-peace-podcast. livesjourney-blog.com/livesjourney-podcast. listennotes.com/podcasts/peace-talks-radio-paul-ingalls-rdw1k603ts. listennotes.com/podcasts/peace-by-believing-john-redmond-j2w6f4oufo. michelledierks.com/podcast. open.spotify.com/show/2is-wikhfl0zkg7rejlwhgt. open.spotify.com/show/4lxvzoltioFDHertzDRNPCWVM. open.spotify.com/show/26ATFMAKPGLACK9ZPH. open.spotify.com/show/3VSVYS70FPL5B5V96PZ1ES. open.spotify.com/show/67EGQEMEGXP0MOXFQCZKG. PEACE-AND-POSSIBILITIES-PODCAST.libzn.com. peaceandparenting.podbean.com. peacecatalyst-podcast.podbean.com. peacenow.org/podcast. peacetalk.libzn.com/podcast. podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/amy-meyer0. podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/somewherezeking. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-talk-the-work-of-the-byron-katie-with-Byron-with-Grace/ID podcasts.apple.com/podcast/ID 15598000957. podcasts.apple.com/gb/podcast/the-little-peace-of-mind-podcast/ID 12555575559. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/passing-the-peace/ID 15039208880. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-be-still-daily-prayer-download/ID 15061012886. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-talks-radios/ID 15365916443. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-in-his-presence/ID 14432482237. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/war-peace/ID 14797219943. podcasts.apple.com/in/podcast/dr-dravo-n-james-every-day-peace/ID 14773533604. podcasts.apple.com/us/peace-in-intersectional-and-decolonial/ID 15392012888. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-croc-cast-peace-studies-conversations/ID 14768694779. podcasts.apple.com/us/finding-peace-in-parenting/id 1546471373. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/inner-peace/id 1207645998. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-by-believing/id 1164729507. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/finding-joy-in-peace/id 1506643683. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-finding-peace-podcast/id 1472700242. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-catalyst-podcast/id 1557581552. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-peace-in-purpose-podcast/id 1546299788. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peacecast/id 1186906190. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/stillness-in-the-storm/id 1467888656. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-in-possibilities/id 1485218863. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/peace-parenting-how-to-parent-without-punishments/id 147633312236. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/asian-peace-talks/id 1561100643. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/on-finding-peace/id 1160378353. Peace Corps podcasts at podcasts.feedspot.com/peace_core_podcasts. allaroundadventure.com/podcast. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-all-around-adventure-podcast/id 1195362314. open.spotify.com/show/2ea5asbmtt86qyfodt2wwh. youtube.com/@allaroundadventure1. podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/moz15. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/moz-15-the-reunion/id 1676491868. open.spotify.com/show/0zxijrkwcwshwjczek7ejk. soundcloud.com/mymoviehouzamirules. podcasts.apple.com/us/my-moviehouse-my-rules/id 1603992086. feeds.buzzsprout.com/2173579. podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/women-of-peace-core-legacies-extra-ordinary-women-podcast/id 1683890475. open.spotify.com/show/0bfu986w9nv4uxv3cccptr. youtube.com/@women-of-peace-core-legacy. jobswithjody.buzzsprout.com. open.spotify.com/show/009for WQNHC8G5QG8 open.spotify.com/show/5PJAGNHF-QQPPQTJNG9KX. podcasts.apple.com/us/global-reentry-presents-jobs-with-jody/id 1523484964. sbracre.com/show/doppelganger-banger. youtube.com/user/peacecorps-connect. Social justice magazines at magazines.feedspot.com/social_justice_magazines. AffinityMagazine.us, AmericaMagazine.org/topic/social-justice, Broadview.org/category/justice, CommonwealMagazine.org/social-justice, CWUPulseMagazine.com/social-justice, JeezMagazine.org, IndiePublishers.org, Lacuna.org.uk/category/justice, LearningForJustice.org/magazine, LearningForJustice.org/magazine/subscribe, Progressive.org, RelevantMagazine.com/category/justice/social-justice, RethinkingSeahools.org, SHADO-MAG.com, ShamelessMag.com, socialworktoday.com/social_justice_index.html, solsticelitmag.org, relevantmagazine.com, thessunmagazine.org, upstreamjournal.org, shamelessmag.com, extramagazine.com/topic/social-justice, yesmagazine.org/topic/social-justice, left-wing podcasts at podcasts.feedspot.com/leftist_political_podcasts, bestoftheLeft.com, deleteouraccount.libcn.com, feeds.buzzsprout.com/1795649, independentleft.ie/socialist-podcast, knower-enemy-1682b684.simplecast.com, leftanchor.podbean.com, leftlanepod.captivate.fm, open.spotify.com/show/2dqtdndocshertzf8lvscdffffm, open.spotify.com/show/5asmggpfiwr6earl4oct2c3, open.spotify.com/show/7u4scumw7vpznu6bqlw7z, open.spotify.com/show/00nytmrv4qmtcuzd3kzbq7, open.spotify.com/show/2tnd800cotjrkx4ouqoanw, open.spotify.com/show/1vrhf50fw3dysjg4tglol, open.spotify.com/show/7fjn6mbi6hbqhnmrdohn6, open.spotify.com/show/7lx6p5rdv1vcwdvzts4t8h, open.spotify.com/show/7vtjtzrsqkjcha318z7vac, open.spotify.com/show/6afdxyprzqoekt6n2aqv, open.spotify.com/show/24xh4ogjgfk09pzjimv50, open.spotify.com/show/7mw2oxbjjbmsgapuji 7k, open.spotify.com/show/5atxxakkk high 0 chi udboi9, open.spotify.com/show/1oxy4uewuzi-eptu8blvip50, podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/eyes-left, podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/superpolitics-show, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/revolutionary-left-radio/ID12180544701, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/eyes-left-podcast/ID14197464991, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/season-of-the-bitch/ID12789088824, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-red-review/ID15710592338, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/life-in-the-left-podcast/ID12000400157, podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/super-politics/id 15098153337 podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/delete-your-account-podcast/id 1121355704 podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/the-lean-to-the-left-podcast/id 14975865002 podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/left-anchor/id 14365355631 podcasts.apple.com/us/fight-the-podcast-with-Jordan-Williams-Crenshaw/id 15471128119 podcasts.apple.com/ca/podcast/srs-lee-wrong/id 8722292891 podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/dead-pundits-society/id 1212081214 podcasts.apple.com/us/podcast/know-your-enemy/id 14627033434 podcasts.apple.com/us/socialist-rifle-association-podcast/id 141920450 revolutionaryleftradio.libcn.com/website seasonoftehebrew.com/episodes socialistra-podcast.simplecast.com soundcloud.com/deadpundits sbracre.com/podcast/fight-the-podcast-with-Jordan-Williams-Crenshaw-4732723 sbracre.com/podcast/the-lean-to-left-podcast-4719048 srslewrong.com/podcast thepunohureport.buzzsprout.com/1924483 youtube.com/@revolutionaryleftradio2089 youtube.com/playlist?list=sign please ultwhj4tx7oe6yzl-FN14LDE_DMJ0RA youtube.com/user/socialist-Canada Libertarian websites at politics.feedspot.com/libertarians_blogs aclrc.com/blog adamsmith.org/blog antiwar.com/blog blog.independent.org blog.10thamendmentcenter.com cafehayek.com campaignforliberty.org danieljmitchell.wordpress.com EFF.org FEE.org/stories FFF.org GetLiberty.org JohnLocke.org/articles LawLiberty.org/category/essays LearnLiberty.org/blog LouRockwell.com Libertarianinstitute.org/blog Libertarianism.org liberty-intl.org/news LibertyNation.com lionsofliberty.com/episodes lp.org lpnc.org outsidethebeltway.com reason.com studentsforliberty.org/blog tomwoods.com/blog velvetgloveironfist.blogspot.com yaliberty.org/blog